When we talk about learning how to solo and sort of having our own voice and so on and so forth, we all know, like, we're told to play like the masters, transcribe the masters, study the masters, and that's all true, and that's all very, very valid, and listening is always the most important thing. But this sort of concept directed at soloing of using motifs or motific development, and however you want to say it, gives us sort of a sense of ownership, I think, over the solo, and also gives us purpose and a place to start. So let's talk now about how we can start using motifs in our solos. Welcome to Learn Jazz Bass with Matt Rubicki. I'm glad that you're here. Motific soloing gives us a place to start, as I said, and it gives us direction. It gives us something to sort of focus on, and I think that is really, really helpful for those of us that are maybe just dipping our toe in the water of soloing or haven't been trying for a while and are just kind of feeling like, I'm not sure what I'm doing when I'm soloing. This gives you an idea of where to start. And the concept is very simple. It is basically to take a motif and develop it. What is a motif? Motif is basically just a very, very short idea that is recognizable to the ear and is developable. You can develop it. And one of the key elements of that is that it is, as I say, short. That can be anywhere from sort of 2 beats to 8 beats or so, sometimes usually no longer than a couple measures. This is all gray, right? There's no hard and fast, but just generally speaking, it can be as little as I say, 2/8 notes. But what's important when we think about motivic development is that there is some kind of period of sort of inactivity after you make the statement of the motif. So that can be either rest or that you're holding out a note, so that your ear and the ear of the listener can process what just happened. Oh, that was a little statement. Now something else is going to happen. That's the basic idea. So rather than go into all the development of how we might, make motifs go longer, let's just focus today on both what a motif is, but also how we can sort of practice making these short little cells of information, because it doesn't necessarily come naturally. We tend to want to sort of noodle, right? Meaning mess around, noodle around, not really have sort of a definitive thing. So here we're giving ourselves some parameters to make things quite limited and really make sure that we are focused on making small and bite-sized pieces of material. And of course, it might seem obvious, but consider that the main parts of a motif have to do with rhythm and melody. And the reason I bring that up is because those are the things that you're going to end up playing with. There's other things that come into play as well. Of course, length of time and like the intervals between notes and so on and so forth. But just consider that those are the basic 2 elements, rhythm and melody, right? When we are sort of turning our mind to this direction of working with motifs, let's be sure that we are listening for that when we are listening to solos. Consider it as you go about your listening life. I'm sure you'll find it more often than you expect when you sort of have a sense of what a little motif is and how it might be developed, which we'll go into in some other videos in the future. For now, let's just do a couple of exercises with this idea of how to create short ideas. These little ideas have to have a strong rhythmic or melodic idea in them to be recognizable and to be usable. In other words, like technically 2 half notes of the same note, A, 2, 3, 4. Technically that is a motif, but it's going to be either super easy or too easy to develop, or it's just not really, your ear doesn't hear it as something interesting. So we want to make something that sounds interesting to us as the primary thing. That can be rhythmic or that can be with the melody itself. So what we want to do is practice how we create these little ideas. As they say, it doesn't necessarily come naturally to all of us. So let's give ourselves a little bit of guardrails to practice how we might do this. What I'm doing here is using the tune On the Trail. Now, usually, in videos like this and other people talk, they usually do like All the Things You Are or a blues or something like that, but there's so many more great tunes to work with. And I like On the Trail a lot because It's in this key that we're familiar with, F, and then it has this little interesting movement right in the middle of it. It's a short form, it's just only 16 bars. That's the tune that I was improvising on at the beginning of this video, and that is the melody that I played first. And the melody itself is sort of a great example of a motif and a development. Now, you know how I said that like there's not just using two half notes isn't necessarily a recognizable melody, right? But something like what they did here with this ascending minor third does sort of qualify as something recognizable as long as you have it in your ear that you're going to try to develop it. If you just leave it alone and never do anything with it, it doesn't sound like much. But the melody goes 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, Okay, a little faster. 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, 4, 1, Those are like the strict melodies. So that sounds like an idea that, in a way, that you could think of both those parts, the call and the response, as being one motif, or you could think of the call as one little motif. And then this is a development. We'll go into development later. But if you listen to the whole thing, notice where there are little statements that are played upon and then sort of resolved. Beginning, and they sort of adopt the development here, and then a little bit of sort of a variation of that more development. That sort of wraps up that sort of statement. And then very cleverly, the composer, keeps that same interval of the minor third in the second half of the melody. And then technically that's the melody itself, but most people don't play that. They play, so they sort of mirror that first part of the melody, the two motifs, and then he closes it out with the same exact motif. That's a total got mixed up there. That's a total period at the end of the sentence. So how can we sort of, as I say, get into this idea? How can we train ourselves to be thinking more about this and be a little bit more purposeful about creating some motifs? Let's take some parameters, like I'm saying, and let's just work on rhythm first. So what I'm doing here, or what I'm thinking of, is to take a single pitch, a single note, and we want to use the play and rest approach that we talked about in my previous video about the soloist's secret best friend, which is to rest and not play. So we're going to use this idea of playing and then resting so that we can take that time of rest to process what we just played and play something else that is not necessarily contrasting, but it is contrasting. It's not completely the opposite, but you don't want to play the same thing twice after the rest. So we are trying to make a small rhythmic statement. We're just using rhythms with one note, then a rest of some kind, then some other kind of rhythmic statement that is not exactly the same as before. But again, we want to keep them sort of recognizable. So it wants to be determinate, something very strong as you can, and rest. In that moment of rest, sort of pay attention to what you played, hear what you just played, and then play something else, something different that is also strong, and so on and so forth. In other words, we're trying to create that initial sort of seed of what would come after. We're trying to create that first motif of many developments to come. So it doesn't sound like a whole lot, but when you actually try to do it, it can be a little bit challenging. So as I say, I'm giving the parameters of just one note and this play rest thing. I'm just going to use the first 8 measures of On the Trail. So it's just a repeating, the first 4 measures of On the Trail. So it's just the 1 chord, F major 7, and then a 2-5, 1, 2-5, 1, 2-5, and play, rest, play, rest. You can do 1 bar of play and 1 bar of rest. And remember, those bars don't have to be strictly exactly 4 beats. You can carry over into the bar. You can start later in the bar and so on and so forth. It's just a general idea. So you can do play, rest, play, rest. You can also try to make these rhythmic statements, these rhythmic cells, these rhythmic motifs a little bit longer, make them into 2 measures or go into the second measure and then rest for that sort of same amount of time, or rest for more time because you've had a longer statement. So you want your next statement to, again, be contrasting in some way. And of course you could mix up, you could do 2 measures and then rest for 2 and then do 1 and so on and so forth. But using that idea, here's some examples that I came up with following this idea. We are looping the first 4 bars. We're using 1 note. I'm trying to play rest and trying to have some alternating sort of contrasting rhythmic ideas. Check this out. 1, 2, 3. All right, so as I said before, it's not going to sound super musical, right? But that's not the idea. It's more an exercise, not a musical thing at the beginning. You're just trying to create that initial little explosion of thought, that small little bite-sized thing you can grab onto and develop from there. So the next step I would invite you to try is to then apply this same idea, but using the chords of a tune. I chose On the Trail, as I mentioned before, because it's 16 measures, the harmony is not that complicated, and there is a little bit of interesting movement. Now, you don't have to do exactly this one I'm about to do here, but what I did was take the exact same rhythms, but then adjust the 1 note to fit the chords that change when there is a dramatic change. 90% of this is still the same note. That C natural works over almost everything. But when the harmony moves up a half step to the 2-5 of G flat, A flat minor 7, D flat 7, then I have to adjust that C. That C is not in the G flat major scale. It's not in any sort of real super acceptable sound right there. So I had to move up, or I chose to move up to make it sound like I know what I'm doing. So it's still gonna sound boring, but now I'm adjusting that 1 note. Let's listen to that real quick. 1, 2, 3. Same rhythms that I did before. Nothing too crazy there for sure, but when you try to apply this yourself, you can come up with a ton of possibilities. One important or one fun thing for me to mention is that when we were just talking about rhythmic possibilities alone, 1 note with rhythmic possibilities alone, I did some math. And I had a lot of fun with some friends and my brother, who are very smart. I tried to put it on Reddit. Nobody gave me an answer whether this was right or not. But I tried to come up with every rhythmic permutation that is possible, starting from whole notes to 16th notes, and including rests, how many rhythmic permutations are possible. And if I'm not mistaken, it's 10,800,000,000 something. Again, if I'm not mistaken. And that includes repeating a note, of course. But 10 billion rhythmic possibilities for 1 note. So imagine if you had 2. Never feel that a short idea is not enough material to work on, is my point there. When you're doing this exercise as well, be sure that you apply it to lots of different kinds of tunes, because you're gonna find, I mean, obviously we solo on lots of different kinds of tunes, right? But the parameters, the guidelines are gonna feel a lot different if you're doing this same thing on a bossa, or if you're doing this same thing on giant steps, or if you're doing the same thing on a monk tune, or if you're doing the same thing on a blues. There's gonna be some differences. And so you wanna feel comfortable in lots of environments of this idea of creating a little something. So there's lots of possibilities. Try it for yourself. If you want to take it to the next level, try to use the same sort of vamp idea that we had before. Start there with just giving yourselves either no harmony or very, very, very simple harmony. But now, rather than just contrasting rhythms, try to come up with contrasting melodies with contrasting rhythms, right? So you've gone from just rhythm to now we're doing contrasting rhythm and melody. And that can be a little bit more challenging. It can be more fun. It starts to sound a little bit more like, you know, a solo a little bit. It's just we're not developing these little ideas. Once again, we're just getting starting ideas into our hands and mind and thinking that way and giving ourselves a little rules to do that. So let me give you some example of couple things I came up with again on this vamp, the beginning 4 bars of On the Trail, just F major and a 2/5. So let's check that out. 1, 2, 3, 4. And just as a reminder, one more time, I just want to say this is not meant to be a continuation of ideas. It's just you're establishing new ideas every time. That's the intent, because we're trying to get ourselves to hear things after we play them, and also come up with shorter things instead of just noodling around. Very, very purposeful, short things. It will give you help when you are starting a solo. One very, 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 very obvious thing that gets said a lot, but I think a lot of us don't really put into application when we are playing, is that the melody of the song is the best place to start for a little melodic idea, for a motif. You probably heard me do it when I was improvising completely at the beginning of the video. I tried to use that A to C, that minor third, as some kind of basis to get started, and then tried to reference that multiple times throughout the several courses that I was playing. So when you have the melody right in front of you, so to speak, you just played the melody, or you know what the song is, you should know what the song is, you should know at least the melody in your ear. Use that as a starting place. Use a little bit of it if it's a very complicated method, but a very complicated melody. But again, it's right there for you. So go ahead and use that. So continuing on as to sort of the fourth part of this exercise, or the fourth exercise, we were just trying to come up with combining contrasting ideas that include rhythm and pitch over one sort of static harmony. So now, like we did before with the rhythm, now include the movement of harmony in a particular song and try to come up with contrasting ideas. It's a little bit more challenging, or might be easier for you. We'll see when you try. So here is what I came up with again, now using the whole chorus of On the Trail and some contrasting ideas that involve contrasting rhythms and contrasting melodies. 1, 2, 3. So you might come up with a little bit of sort of awkward phrasing here and there, like you heard some of this be, especially at the end, it sounded a little awkward. But again, we're not trying to make it sound like it's a continuation of an idea. We're kind of trying to come up with new ideas. It's a tool. It's not a solo in and of itself. Just, hey, can I get started with some new ideas? Feel free to write them down. I certainly wrote these down for myself when I was figuring them out. And you don't have to necessarily improvise it quickly, although that is really, really helpful, because that's what we're trying to train ourselves to do, is to be in the moment and come up with little ideas and sort of make them very distinct, and also wait and sort of hear what we just played, and then we'll continue it from there. As a quick review, we are trying to come up with those little ideas and hear them after we play them. Give some time for us and others to hear them, and then we will develop them later. For now, we're forcing ourselves to come up with ideas first by starting with just rhythm. We're giving ourselves very simple parameters. Come up with a simple rhythm that is recognizable and determinate and confident. Rest, hear that in your head, and play something that contrasts with it later. We're just starting on one simple sort of vamp, one simple harmonic sound. You don't even have to use chords. But introduce chords or introduce more harmony in the next step, where you are still keeping with one note, contrasting rhythms, but adjust to the harmony. Then the next step would be to take that vamp again and now contrast rhythm and melody. So make different kinds of actual motifs that do not continue the previous idea. It's very, very helpful if you wait in between those ideas so that you can play something else and you can also process what you just heard. And do that over a vamp, if I didn't mention, or some kind of simple harmonic background. And then introduce actual movement of harmony and try to do the same thing. This is just the first step. This is just a primer into this whole thing. We're going to do more videos about how we can develop these ideas in the future. But hopefully this will get you a good start. And again, going into a solo with a particular idea is going to be very, very helpful for keeping us focused as we are improvising. Thanks for joining me today. Look below for a free PDF, and thank you for coming. Let me know any questions or comments. I love to hear it. Always remember, straight ahead and strive for tone.